The July sitting of Tynwald has 52 items on the order paper, 47 of which have come from government. That's more business than the May and June Tynwalds combined, and will most likely see a lengthy 3-day sitting. On Perspective today, I'm joined by two guests who will be sitting there for that potentially 3-day sitting. Stu Peters, MHK, Rob Callister, MHK. Also joined by political commentator Paul Moulton. So, if I could begin then, talk to Rob Callister. What do you think? What's tickling your fancy on the Tynwald order paper this week? Because there's loads of items there.
Yeah, there's 52 items in total, Phil. I think there's a range of things to get your teeth into. Obviously, as chairman of Manx Utilities, I'll be bringing in further funding requests in order to complete the necessary works for the regional sewerage in Laxey and Garth, and for the people of Peel. And Stu, have you got any particular items that you're interested in? I was tempted to play the Postman Pat theme music. Perhaps you could explain to the listeners why I might have wanted to do that.
Yes, subject to Tynwald approval, I've been asked to be chairman of the Isle of Man Post Office. Like I say, that's subject to approval on Tuesday, Wednesday and or Thursday. As a joke, I posted on Manx forums where they had a thread about it that my first job was going to be to paint all the post office vans yellow and to call all the postmen and women Pat with name badges, and to get a black and white cat to stick in the back window. And the first comment to that was, I don't think he's even joking, you know.
And I suppose, Paul, I've given everyone else the opportunity to tell us what they were interested in on the Tynwald agenda, and any big items there that you think might startle the Manx public.
I'll tell you what I'm more interested in is why there are so many questions with so little need for some of them to be put into that arena. It just amazes me why people can't just ask a quick question and get an answer for them. I mean, it's just got out of control. I'm sure that's where we're going to go here. That's 40 questions of my lifetime. On Tuesday, we'll be there morning and afternoon trying to video this thing for the 10 people that might want to watch it. But it's gone a bit crazy. I mean, I think people have lost sight of where questions should be going. I mean, quite often they know the answers to these. I get the thing. You want to do your bit for your constituencies, and you want to have your 2 minutes, of asking it. And then the supplementaries, of course, is when it gets more interesting because that's off script. But so many times you just see these ministers standing up and reading something that they haven't probably even hardly had any contribution to. It's come from obviously their officers, and you'll know the answer to this one. So you're reading out somebody else's statement, really, just to get it into Hansard. And then, as I said, the fun starts when you see the various ministers scrambling for these supplementaries because they've got like 4 or 5 guesses probably of where the next question is going to come to. Now, that's not everyone, because some people can really actually answer the questions, but many people haven't got really that ability to sound like they know what they're talking about in great depth. And I'm getting some interesting looks here from my two gentlemen on both sides.
And of course, the point always used to be with a question. You would ask a question of a minister for 2 reasons. The first reason would be the minister or the minister's department had failed to give you the answer outside of the parliamentary setting. The other was because you had been given an answer by a minister and you didn't like the answer and you wanted to embarrass the minister in some way, or challenge the minister for the answer that they'd given. But it appears now to be more like a citizens' advice bureau. I mean, Rob, what's gone wrong with question time?
Yeah, I think people have to remember there is a cost in officers' time to prepare all these statements. And I think, absolutely you're right, Phil. I think there should be some sort of test to it. I only put a question down if I think it's in the public interest, or if I feel I haven't had the answer back from the department. 99% of all of the inquiries I get from constituents, I can fire it straight through the department. It can be addressed and I get a response back within a reasonable time. So to me, I think most of what's happening in this administration, and it happened in the last administration, there's almost like a point scoring system where members want to be seen to have asked the most questions. But when you actually break it down to quality of those questions, they're not very good, most of them, and it takes up a considerable amount of time of Tynwald Court and the House of Keys. And I hope there is a bit of a shake-up, because I think there should be some sort of test of the quality. But that really comes down to the clerks of looking at those questions. When you're just asking a simple question, you're saying, well, can you not answer that by email? But the members have the right to ask any question they want. So we've got to get the balance right.
Mind you, at least you have the opportunity to ask these questions, and ministers have to answer the questions. I tried 5 ministers to come on this show, issued 5 invitations over the course of the week just gone by, and unfortunately none of the ministers I'd asked were available. The other 3 ministers that I didn't ask, one is on agenda tomorrow night, and the other 2 have been very frequent contributors to my shows. One of the ministers hasn't appeared on any of the shows that I've done since the election, despite me asking.
You going to name names then? Come on.
No, I'll give them a chance on this
come on,
occasion.
Phil.
But,
This is what you have to do.
but it is quite extraordinary. I mean, apart from anything else, this is a great opportunity for you, if you were a minister, to explain what government's about. There's an awful lot on the Tynwald order paper.
Lots of is, though, that Rob and I have got no friends, and therefore we're always available for anything, whether it's a free cup of tea.
And it's great to have you on the show. And you know, I know
second division lots. Yes.
But I mean, looking back then to the order paper, I mean, there's some big statements being made here. We've got offshore energy, we've got climate change, review of harms caused by illicit drugs, the built environment reform programme, and indeed the economic strategy. So statements on issues that seem to be, well, I don't know. Normally a statement is, I'm afraid we haven't got anything for you yet. We were supposed to have done it by such and such, but it's not here. So therefore, I'm making a statement, and it'll be here shortly. But these look as though they're going to be statements of quite significant substance. Is this the correct way to go about it?
I think it's a case of trying to get these in before the summer recess, isn't it? I think that's part of the problem. I mean, as a newbie MHK, I've never seen a 3-day sitting before, and I dread it. I don't know if there are enough fishermen's friends in the world to sort of, keep me going without a cigarette for 3 days, but there you go. So I think it's people trying to cram things in before the recess is the problem. And the other problem is that I think that an awful lot of people listening to this won't realise the amount of work you've got to do as an MHK, in terms of somebody will say, oh, it's a very full order paper, and that's the end of it. Very full order paper. I've spent every spare hour for the last week reading through the memos and the explanatory notes with all these things, and I'm still not all the way through it. And the problem with being an MHK is that you're supposed to be a semi-expert in an awful lot of things, or at least have a point of view about things. So, hydrocarbon taxes and whatever it might be, sanctions against Russia. We're supposed to be able to look at these things and be able to vote on them with some degree of knowledge, and it's incredibly hard work. And sometimes you just can't. I mean, there are certain things that are so far outside my scope of expertise that I just have to trust the officers or the ministers that are bringing these things forward.
And one of the items on the order paper from Daphne Kane is asking for a review of the new, relatively new standing order, which requires business to have been on the order paper or on the register for business for over 6 weeks. So, Rob Callister, is that a sensible move, do you think, bearing in mind what we're now experiencing? Perhaps Daphne wouldn't have been so keen to have moved this had she just experienced a 3-day sitting with all the items that we're likely to be facing.
I think if you speak to most members, the 6 weeks notice period is not working. I think there's too many items. If you go through the 52 items, they're given the apology saying it hasn't had the required 6 weeks period. So if you stripped all them back, the order paper would be a lot lighter. To go back to what Stu and yourselves just said with regard to these statements, I think the problem is with these statements, the Council of Ministers may be fully aware of what these statements relate to, but as backbench MHKs, we have no detail of this. We may, during the speech, when the minister stands up, get an email to say this is the speech. You're then having to speed read that in the chamber, and then at the same time listening to the delivery of the speech. At the same time as that, also preparing questions in order to challenge the minister or to ask the minister on a topic you have no understanding of what that topic's going to be. So that also needs to be reviewed at some point, because members need to, as Stu rightfully said, we've spent every spare hour of the last couple of weeks going through the order paper, researching bits that we want to be interested in, actually reading the rest to make sure we've got a grasp of what is going through the Tynwald court. And if you actually compare that to those statements we have no information on, and that needs to change as well, because there's far too many statements coming through.
So no secret briefings on any of these statements then?
No, not necessarily. No, I don't think we have, actually, to be fair, on this occasion.
Hang on.
I'm a big fan of the secret briefings, I have to say, because there's usually a sandwich and a sausage roll involved.
Because there are briefings, and they're not secret. You quite often will have something big that all the members of Tynwald are asked to come to the room over lunch, no doubt, and they get it there. So when it gets to Tynwald, quite often it's really sort of everyone knows what is going to be said.
To the order paper,
yeah.
These we may have some, but we don't know. We haven't seen the site of the
not
meetings.
the questions, but the orders.
So, take for example, we do know that the economic strategy. We've had a briefing on that one. That's one that we've definitely had some information. But then the building around the environment, the review of harms caused by illicit drugs, the climate change. Yes, we'll have some understanding, but we don't physically know what the ministers are going to stand up. Now, if in the Council of Ministers, they've almost certainly seen those statements, so they are prepared to step in and support their colleagues. But as backbench MHKs, we have to wait for that statement to be delivered.
Are you saying you want to see all that up front all the time?
I mean,
is there any point of Tynwald then? Because surely you know the answers before you get going.
Well, no, I think it's a public statement. It's there for the general public to actually listen to what the government's doing on the economic strategy and climate change, or, as you say, the environmental reform programme. But as members, we should be given that statement in advance of the sitting so we can quickly read it. We know what questions to ask, what to challenge, to get the points of direction. So it's really difficult being in the chamber, listening to those statements, and then also trying to think what you need to say.
And to be fair, Paul, I mean, you were with me in the secret briefing we had.
We can't talk about that,
which we're not allowed to talk about, on the economic strategy.
Right.
All I can say, I think it's not unreasonable to say, was there were two very glitzy performances, and if for the first you're really hearing of the meat of the topic is delivered by someone who has been rehearsing their lines for at least 2 weeks beforehand, it is easy for things to slip through and be generally supportive and perhaps not questioned if you don't know that much about the detail in advance.
I agree. I mean, getting the wrinkles out of the system. I mean, wasn't the Island Plan the first time around? It didn't go through, did it? I mean, Alf put it forward, much to everyone's shock. It didn't hit the numbers. And I think there's the lessons learned that let's take everyone through it beforehand. Let's get rid of any of the issues. Let's make sure that everyone's on board, or there's enough people on board. So when I do present it to Tynwald, it should just go through on a nod, right?
Well, that's not actually correct. I mean, a lot of the time, the ministers do need to explain. So as Stu rightfully said, we're not experts in every single topic. So sometimes you've got to take my role as chairman of Manx Utilities. When we make a presentation, I'm expected to have the information. So with me today is a file of about 6 inches thick. That's all of my own personal research into what I'm proposing to do in Tynwald on Tuesday, the previous debates. So I'm supposed to be there to be able to answer the questions that members may have. So it's up to you as the minister or the chairman, and Stu will have to do this as the chair of the post office if it's approved next week. He will have to spend a considerable amount of time researching himself, knowledging himself on a topic. So when his colleagues challenge him, either in a briefing or on the floor, he can answer those questions quite confidently to persuade his colleagues to actually vote in that particular direction. And that takes quite a lot of time.
And do you think, I mean, Stu and Paul, I suppose you've been around a while from the Stu on the other side of the fence, commenting, looking at the way Manx politics works. Do you think sometimes Tynwald members over-prepare for Tynwald these days? You're standing for election. You know what you believe. You know what you think. Surely, certainly at election time. So actually, a debate on any particular topic, you ought to know what you think without having it all written down in triplicate.
Sort of. I mean, yes, some people are far better on the feet. off the cuff than I am. I because I've got such a rubbish memory, unless I write things down, I forget half of them before I actually get on my feet. So I usually make a note of what I want to say if I want to say something. And I try only to say something if I think I'm going to add to the debate. There are an awful lot of people in Keys and Tynwald who speak because they feel as though they ought to, and add very little to anything. You know, we sometimes have debates on things where, you know, you might get a dozen or 18 members all effectively saying the same things so that they can be seen by the constituents as adopting a particular programme. And I don't know that that's helpful. When Alistair Ramsey first commented about these secret briefings, which did make me laugh a bit, and remember that I've only ever seen the system as it stands at the moment, it's a nonsense, really. And I think I probably commented on socials about it, and somebody said, yes, but we're the people who voted you in. We want to see government at work, and therefore, if you've all agreed things beforehand, then that's not right. That's not democratic. But the worry is that I think that Tynwald and Keys becomes a little bit of a sort of a celebrity death match thing, where what people listen for is a big fallout amongst members, you know, and I think that those days have gone. I think that the briefings beforehand, I think, are an integral part of being a government, being a parliament.
And certainly I would agree to a certain extent, although the more I look back at my time giving secret briefings, although they were clear. I mean, the briefings were information that would end up in the public domain, but it does sort of take the sting out of the debate quite a bit. I think, Paul. I mean, I don't know. You've obviously been following Tynwald for quite some years. I'm not commenting in any way about how old you are, because obviously you're the Peter Pan of Manx political journalism. But what would you say? I mean, has it become a bit duller in recent years, or is there still the same level of passion and concern?
There's a fine line, isn't there, between being interesting and being completely potty? Because over the years we've had some members who just completely dominated things, and will have something to say about everything. And it's like watching House of Commons when you got the Scottish National Party, Scottish. Anyway,
I still think the passion's there, though. When you look, you've been in the chamber, Paul.
Yeah.
When there is a proper debate, you'll see it. You'll see it less than maybe people just, as Stu said it previously, standing up and just making statements for the sake of it or just wanting to be heard. When people are really passionate for a topic, you will actually see that passion come through in their speech.
True, but you've always got the council ministers who basically will keep stom. Even if they don't agree with it, they're not going to stand up and really fight against it because they've got that collective responsibility to some degree. So that takes out all of them, doesn't it? So you're left with people like yourself who still waiting for that ministerialship to come through, and then you can join the inner tent probably, and you'll be quiet then.
No, it's not. I will not change who I am. I will always give an honest opinion, an honest answer to an honest question. Yeah. I've done that since I started my political career as an Onken commissioner, and I'm proud to keep that going. And it makes no difference what position I hold. You know, either a backbench MHK, chairman of Manx Utilities, or even a minister if I ever held that position in the future.
But you will be affected, or anyone's affected, aren't they? Once you're in the council of ministers, Phil, you are affected.
It limits how you can say things. It doesn't necessarily limit you speaking. And I commented to a seasoned member of Tynwald when I was despairing at the fact that I couldn't get any ministers prepared to come onto the show this week, and I said, I was always available. I'd bend over backwards to be available for the media when I was involved in politics. And I said, was it just me? And they said, yeah, it probably was, actually. so maybe there is some sense in rationing your appearances on the media. But I do think there's a role there. Ministers, you can't be in that role without actually explaining yourself to the public from time to time.
Every administration have their own ways of dealing with the media. If we're just slightly going off on a tangent here, but we have this system at the minute. On Tuesdays, we can make a bid for people for Thursdays. Now, it hasn't always gone to plan. Sometimes it's not happening. But basically, all the ministers have the 2 till 4 or 1 till 3, whatever it is, in their diaries for the media interviews. And that's an interesting concept because this is therefore a government that seems to be wanting forward. And it was from Alf Cannon who, from him downwards, saying this is how it's going to be. Now, under Howard Quayle, we hardly saw him I mean, we zoomed in, every so often with the COVID stuff, but we didn't see much of him. There was no sort of particular policies, and I'm sure you had the same thing, Stu, when you're trying to get hold of these people for your shows and things. It's different mentality, different mindsets, different ways of dealing with things. Certainly media has to be part of the whole mix these days. You've got to convince the public on things, and you, Mr. Callister, have got a massive one this week, with the sewage thing, surely.
It is massive, and I've spent more time on that one topic to try and get the additional £16 million to complete the project for the people of this island than I have on any other topic. It's massive. The vote's going to be close, I feel, but I feel the people of Laxey have a right, and the people of Peel have a right to get this work completed. We're almost there, and as I'll say on Tuesday, we've been discussing waste on the island since 1992. And we did have an all-island system to start with, and then we went to a regional in 2007, and we've now been working on the regional. We've had 2011, we spent £39.9 million on phase one, which actually came in at £11 million under budget, and it came in on time. And I think that's an absolute fantastic achievement by the staff within Manx Utilities. And then 2019, we've asked for £23.5 million. That has already been supported by Tynwald. And we've already got the Tynwald go-ahead to get this work started. What we've found out in the last few years is the costs have increased. We all know about the cost of living, and the cost of the actual materials have all increased. And yes, we'll be going back to Tynwald to ask for £16.9 million. We believe some of that funds could be reduced further by selling assets at the end of the process, and actually offsetting some to a government department as well. So even though if we take everything into account, as I said before this programme started, back in 2007, the Minister of the day actually said it would cost around about £85.1 million to complete the regional sewage works on our island. We will be pretty much bang on the money if we get the funding on Tuesday and get the work completed by 2024.
Because this is a lot of the problem, isn't it? Budgets are stated to Treasury. Treasury says you can't have that much. Budget is then reduced, and then ultimately you end up having to come back and asking for the money that you knew you needed in the first place.
No, I think what happened, if we'd had the planning permissions in place, this work would have been completed within the last administration. That was the promise made in 2019. I'm now going to stand up on Tuesday and try and commit that promise to this administration, which is part of the island plan. So if the funding doesn't go through and we cannot complete by 2024, then we have failed our objective, which is set out in the island plan.
So, Stu, reasonable, Rob?
It raises an interesting question, this, doesn't it? Because one of the things that I stood for election on was accountability. And I talk quite a lot about schemes like the Liverpool landing stage and like the promenade and all the rest of it. And the fact that nobody's ever held accountable for overspends. Rob and the MUA are coming to Tynwald this week for an extra almost... an extra, 80% over the originally agreed amount of money. And that's ridiculous. It's completely and utterly ridiculous. However, having said that, I think I'll probably have to vote for it, because the alternative is that, the people in Laxey and Peel or whatever don't have a proper sewage scheme. So, we are put in a position as politicians where you can have the best will in the world to try and stop these overspends all the time, but they all get to a certain stage where you've got to continue or it was the same with the Liverpool landing stage. We could have all said no to it and ended up with a £40 million piece of land in Liverpool that was no use to anybody.
And Rob, I mean, the public will probably be quite in line with what Stu's just said there. It's really quite hard for people to understand how it was 23 million the last time you asked, and then suddenly
Agreed.
It's gone up.
Okay, let's just put this in thing. I absolutely respect Stu's opinion. He's absolutely right, but we should not associate this with the Liverpool landing station, the promenade, or other failed projects. This is not an overspend. This is a recalculation of costs to complete the work. And part of the reason why we're going back to Tynwald is because we've listened to the communities, especially in Laxey and in Garth. because what's happened is, if they want the cheapest option, we build at the Cairn site and we allow the sewerage to go out that way, and the gravity flows down into that. That's not the right decision, and as a member responsible for tourism, I absolutely endorse the decision by the Manx Utilities not to appeal that planning application. So what they've done is they've listened to the community, they've looked at the revaluation of pumping back to Meriveg. That is, it's going to add an additional £6 million onto that scheme if we went that far back, plus it would create some issues in Onken. So what they've done is they've listened to the community, they've listened to the residents in Baldrine and Laxey, and they've put a treatment works in the middle. Now, to do that, it has added some additional costs, and this is where I get a little bit confused, because the member, one of the members who's pushing quite hard to have it put back to Meriveg, actually, what we've done is we've delivered on her promise, and that is, please do not put it in the middle of the village. So we've listened to them, but there is additional costs, and that is one of the reasons why we're going back to Tynwald to ask for more money, because we've listened to the community, especially in Laxey.
And there's going to be additional revenue costs associated with this too, because effectively you're going to have to now pay to pump the sewage, whereas the other scheme didn't require that expense. Now, perhaps that's good news for the other side of your MUA in terms of the electricity, because the biggest user of the whole of the sewage treatment system on the island, the biggest user of the electricity on the island is the MUA.
Absolutely. I think when you speak to, and what's really upset me this week is that I've seen the best and the worst of people this week. And I think one of the worst things I've seen this week is people are not allowed to speak their minds, because if you go against a certain view within the village by a small group of people, it actually gets pushed down. And that to me is unacceptable on a political level and on a local level. And I hope if we get the funding on Tuesday and this goes to planning, the people that actually just want to get this scheme done, especially in Garth, they come out and they submit letters to say they support the scheme. I know they've got to see plans, and we've got a lot of public engagement to do. As for Peel, I'm not ignoring Peel. It's fantastic. When I met Peel commissioners the other day, they are absolutely behind the scheme. They want this done. They've even asking us to get it done before 2024. And if we get the funding on Tuesday, I can promise the people of Peel we will do everything we can to try and deliver it as quickly as we can for those people.
So you're listening to Perspective with me, Phil Gorn, and my guests, Rob Callister, MHK, Stu Peters, MHK, and political commentator Paul Moulton. Paul, you didn't seem wholly convinced by Rob's answers.
I don't take your place, but I'm biting my tongue here. I mean, surely, Mr. Callister, you've sat down with all your members to have a briefing. You were talking about at the very top. You should know where you're going on Tuesday. Surely you had the briefings. They know what's coming up. You've read the mood music from the room. So you keep saying, "I hope to get it through," and I'm surprised to hear that sort of terminology. I thought you must know, and if it didn't sound like it was going through, you'd probably take it back and have another look at it, right?
We did have a Tynwald briefing, and we got questions back, and we've sent emails to members to ask them if they have any additional questions. No, you can't always go into Tynwald Court expecting to have the votes in your back pocket. You've got to work for them, and you've got to convince members. And when you have a particular item that doesn't really affect their constituents in Peel and in Garth, other members, are harder to persuade, because they can be persuaded very easily by an argument. So I've got to stand up on Tuesday. I have to actually convince the members that this is the right decision, and I want the members to take the bold step to get this work completed once and for all, because as I've said, we've been talking sewerage for over 30 years. Now is the time to complete this work for this island, because we need it for an UNESCO biosphere, and it all forms part of the island plan. So let's get it done, please.
Happy with the answer?
No, because if it's the wrong answer, if it's the wrong plan, it doesn't make it better to whiz it through and then have to look at it again in 5 years' time and fix it.
No, it is. Tynwald has made the direction of regional. We have tested the cost in respect of regional and the pump away. We've explained to members which we feel was the best. We're now going to go ahead of this, and if I had stood up here and actually said on this programme that I've got the votes already in my bag, you'd be accusing it of being just a whitewash, and why are we sitting in Tynwald for 3 days if everything's already been decided? So what I'm saying is I'm hopefully confident I've got the support of my colleagues, and then we can get on with the work. And it's got the difficult part will come during planning.
Do you believe in it? Do you actually
Absolutely.
believe it? 100% this is the solution to the problem, and you will stand on that?
Absolutely. And you've got to remember, I was the chairman of the infrastructure the Environment and Infrastructure Policy Review Committee that looked at the works at Peel, and we made several recommendations. And what I'm proposing on Tuesday is actually bringing some of those recommendations from that committee and actually implement them. One of those is the ragged leachate. We deal with that once and for all. That is a recommendation that came from my committee back in 2018. So you're asking me, do I support this? Absolutely.
And if you don't get it through, will you resign from the MU?
I will make that decision on Tuesday.
Oh, so you might. Okay, right.
Well,
Sorry,
there you
Phil, over to you.
So, Stu, you may get another chairmanship if you're lucky.
Shall we have a go at this one? Hang on. You said, I'm sure you didn't want to have any responsibility in government, Mr. Peters.
No, I didn't say that at all, Paul. As you already know, I said I wouldn't take a government department position for at least a year.
This is virtually the same thing. I mean, you've got a lot of work if you take it, right?
Well, technically, it's
and
not.
an uplift on your
Well,
salary?
no. I mean, I became a member of the Constitution, Legal Affairs and Justice Committee, Standing Committee of Tynwald, and I became vice chairman of the OFT fairly soon after being elected. So it was just that I didn't want to be part of a department for the first 12 months until I got the hang of things. So I think the post office, and it is nearly a year anyway, but. I don't see that there's a conflict there at all. So
just, there's only, of the huge order paper, there's only 5 items down from Tynwald members, backbenchers, so to speak. All the rest are effectively government motions. So we've already had a fair hearing on the gas extraction motion from Joni Farragher. Obviously, she doesn't want to see gas extraction. I'm sure we all know what Stu's view is on that.
Yeah, well, yes, and I think it's very naughty of Joni. It's like people that don't seem to have got the hang of Brexit. The public had to say, as far as Brexit's concerned, all right, it wasn't a huge majority, but the decision was taken and government went with Brexit. And there are so many people now trying to sort of, turn that around and to go back on it and to get back into Europe. And really, if those efforts were spent on just cracking on in the new system of things, then the world would be a better place. And I think it's the same with the Crogger gas job. Council of Ministers has decided to grant the licence for another 2 years or 27 months, I think, and yet people are still trying to stop it and block it, and I think it's very naughty.
2 other items then. Social tariffs for the internet. This is being brought from the member for Arbury, Castleton and Maloo, Mr Moorhouse, and of course a rather mischievous general debate by Mr Ashford on the local government reform. These are 2 topics, certainly the latter of the 2 topics is one that we could probably debate for several weeks. But what about the social tariffs for the internet? Has anyone got a view on that?
Yeah, I think government should push a little bit, but I think more could be done via our local providers, Manx Telecom, Sure, by way of example. I think in the UK, when I was looking at this, one provider in the UK does provide free internet for people on certain benefits. So absolutely, I think there's a wider discussion on this, was the fact is that we're still paying far too much for utilities and especially internet. If you compare us to the UK, we do need to look at it and actually reduce some of these costs. In respect to social tariffs, again, if we're linking it to certain benefits, yes, I can get that because that's what's happening in the UK. However, I think Manx Telecom, Sure and other providers should be doing more to actually lower the costs for all providers.
I think we've got to be very careful about comparing ourselves always with the UK. I mean, the thing that I've realised years and years ago is that the Isle of Man just doesn't have the economies of scale of the UK. So to say that we pay, an horrendous price for internet here compared to the UK, I just think that that's unfair. And it's the same with food and with everything else that costs more in the Isle of Man. We're a small island. We've got 85,000 people here. So producers and retailers and wholesalers just don't have the economy of scale.
Quite an extraordinary comment there, though, from the chairman of the Manx Utilities Authority, that we pay far too much for utilities in the Isle of Man. I'm amazed that, Paul, you hadn't sprung into action on that one.
We do that. We do pay too much, and I think it's a case we're going through this cost of living crisis, and we've all got to try and look at ways of lowering the bills. And it's something I'd said in my manifesto, that I do think that we need to look at all of our utilities. I know, from an electricity point of view, we are cost sensitive. We are a monopoly. We get all of that, and we try to set our tariffs as low as we possibly can. But obviously we need to do more. But at the moment we're in this middle of this cost of living crisis, which is affecting everything: food, electricity, gas, everything. So we do need to look at the whole range of things to try and lower our bills where we can.
And of course, the statement, the first statement on the audit paper from the Chief Minister in relation to the economic strategy will assist with some of this at some point. But I don't think we're releasing any secrets in saying that any economic strategy is going to take time, and we have a problem at the moment, particularly you have in terms of utilities, in terms of the raw product, the gas.
Unfortunately, we are heavily reliant on natural gas, to actually generate our electricity. Maybe we should have done more in respect of the renewables we put online over the last 2-3 years. But we are working hard now to get them online as soon as possible. I'm happy to tell people, I just wrote an article for my newspapers where I'm actually telling people to be prepared for the autumn and the winter this year. I think Manx Utilities has done everything they can to keep the cost as low as they can. We've increased, as you know, 30%, but given the cost that we've incurred since March 2021, then I think people have to expect an increase in the autumn and possibly in the winter next year, because the price of natural gas has not come down. It still well exceeds 250 pence per therm, and you've got to remember back in March 2021 we were paying a steady 50 pence per therm, and that had been in place for 10 years. So we're in a completely different place now, and I'm happy just to let people know that they should prepare for more increases in the autumn.
Local government reform, is that going to go anywhere, Paul, do you think?
Oh my goodness, you asking me that one? I mean, how old am I? I mean, how many times has that been brought up? Philip, over to you, because come on, this is never going to be sorted, is it? I mean, tell me, give me some hope.
People get bored that they bring this one back because that or another review into Manx Radio. I see that we've not had one of those in this administration yet, but that seems to be a fairly regular thing, doesn't it? Local government reform seems
and yet
to be
this
much
is
the same.
Pretty fundamental to in terms of economic strategy. We are looking at a range of different options. Obviously, I can't talk about the strategy. The Chief Minister will tell us all about that on Tuesday. But one of the obvious things that we could say are that there are 3 key ways of raising income. One is income tax, and all the economic strategies and reports that have ever been have said we can't change that if we want to maintain business on the Isle of Man in the form that it currently is. Another is VAT, and of course we benefited from £200 million extra for many years, which actually, despite us having a low tax model, resulted in us actually having a high tax solution because we were effectively getting the 200 million extra from the UK. The other taxation is the local taxation, and certainly in our neighbouring countries, Ireland and the UK, you'd expect to be paying an awful lot more in local taxes. Even in Douglas, you'd be expecting to pay an awful lot more than you currently do. So is this an area that has been neglected too long?
Well, we go back to, David Ashford actually brought this particular debate to Tynwald Court in November 2017. It was followed up by questions from Laurie Hooper in 2019. For me, we might as well just copy and paste that debate from 2017 and put it back into Hansard and move on, because we're never really going to sort this problem out, because local authorities, as I said in that debate, they need to be big enough to actually deliver the services, but small enough to be accountable to their ratepayers. And I know David will always skip around Douglas and leave Douglas, and then we'll sort out the rest. And I think if we are going to have a debate on local authority reform, then we need a proper debate which also includes Douglas. And that to me is, I've not changed my view on that in the last 5 years.
Are we over-governed?
Oh, let me have a go at that one. Yes. I mean, just by sitting in Tynwald, and I've sat with members of foreign governments who are invited over, this big jolly that they come here, and we all go over there to some sunny climes at some point and look at their parliaments. But I've had 2 recently, and listening to the quality of questions that have been asked in, I think it was House of Keys, to be honest, doesn't make any difference really, and they rolled their eyes because they couldn't believe the level of the questions for the national government, which are things that really should be dealt with by the local authorities, probably. And it does bring into effect, at what point, do we determine those questions? We'll actually come back to the whole thing. Well, those questions really, should they be in Tynwald or House of Keys, or should they just be dealt with by the local authorities in many cases?
And of course, this is one of the issues that has just been bouncing around for years and years and years, and nobody really seems to have managed to address it. I had a little under the radar go by actually transferring services back to local authorities. The idea was this was the first step, and then more services would follow, and then ultimately local authorities would either have to sort of work together, merge with each other to deliver the services, or...
I have memories of that, Phil, as an Onken Commissioner. I think that was called slipping costs over to local authority instead of actually pushing services over. And, you know, some local authorities have merged, and I think that's good. I think they should be, more of that should happen around the island to make, especially in some of the smaller parishes in the north. You know, I'd love to see the likes of Andrews Bride and Derby come together and actually have that.
Who would Onken merge with?
I mean, if you go back in time, Onken has been a very good local authority, and I think it delivers as well, same as Ramsey does. They are both of the right size, you know, delivering to their communities. They've got all of the service that they need to do. So I've always said that if you look at the modelling, it should be the types of Ramsey and Onken who deliver it to around about 9,000 residents. I think Douglas is a little bit too big sometimes, and I think some of the other ones are far too small. And I remember a long, long time ago, I went to one local authority and I sort of asked about this question about merging everything. And she says, no, I'm fine, happy organising the Christmas fair and the summer fair. We don't need anything else, thank you. And that was it. That was one local authority. And I remember having that discussion in the Santon Hotel going back many years.
Well, bureaucracy, I'm waiting for Mr. Peters to chirp in there. I'm sure in your days on the radio, you were always talking about the way we were doing everything over-governed.
Well, I'm a bit ambivalent about local authority reform because on the one hand, I think that maybe an all-island rate would be a good thing in that nobody lives more than a dozen miles from the nearest utility or swimming pool or theatre or whatever, generally speaking. So you know, adopting this UK system of having different authorities, I think is wrong. On the other, people have said to me over the years, no, it's very important that we've got local commissioners, you know, and it's the whole thing about local authorities for local people. So I'm a bit on the fence about it, to be honest.
Excellent position for an MHK to be.
Yeah, I'm sure he was going to be the one that's making decisive decisions. You were going to talk for the common man. All that
anyway, there are other items on the order paper, and two that are sort of linked. Isle of Man government's childcare strategy, which hasn't completed its 6 weeks on the Register of Business, and the preschool credit scheme, which also hasn't completed its 6 weeks. £325,940 being sought for the preschool credit scheme. Any views on this, gents?
No, I support giving the extra funds, as I say, and I also support the strategy, the childcare strategy, because DFE had a good input into that document. I think, as I've said during the election, every child on the island deserves to have the best possible start in life, but I've also been a very, very strong advocate of lifelong learning. Learning doesn't stop once you leave school. People need to be given an extra chance to gain those qualifications, gain the experience, and I'm prime example of that. I left school with very few qualifications, and I had to go back to college, and I had to learn online as well to get those qualifications that I needed. But that also ties in with what the Chief Minister's looking to appoint those non-exec directors. When you talk about that, there's no sort of professional qualification standards around it. So all of that should tie in. Yes, bringing people with experience and everything else what a non-exec director should do, but surely it should be benchmarked against some real top quality qualifications, such as the Institute of Directors, Chartered Management, etc., etc.
And could we not effectively do away with LegCo and using the savings from not having LegCo, you could actually afford to pay for non-executive directors to assist Tynwald members in their business?
Does that mean that MHKs get more money, Phil?
Depends. I would doubt it. I mean, the idea would be where are you going to get the money to pay for all this these non-executive directors?
I think LegCo fulfills an important purpose. Whether or not it does enough, or whether or not it's too highly paid for what it does, or you know, whatever, I really don't know. Remember that I've come into this new 12 months ago, and so some of the thoughts that I'd had as a broadcaster looking at it from the outside have probably mellowed a little bit. So I don't particularly have a problem with LegCo as such. Maybe non-exec directors or whatever. I don't know.
It's a strange one, though, Stu, because on that item we're looking at, there's no reference to how much they're going to be paid, how they can be physically removed if you don't feel, all the qualifications. There's just a lot more information on that one that is needed, and I'll be interested to hear how the Chief Minister outlines this vision, because is it somebody who's going to sit right next to the Minister and give him a sound advice? Well, isn't that what the Chief Executive's role is? And isn't that what the Chief or the senior team within the departments, that's their role? So I'm just not sure how this is going to work. It'll be interesting to see how it works in practice.
Certainly, as a minister, former minister, I would have found it particularly useful. I think, particularly in DOI. I think in terms of agriculture, fisheries, the farmers and fishermen were very quick to advise you anyway. So you didn't really need the non-executive directors there. But I think there's potentially a role. The other thing, of course, which has received quite a bit of attention, not least the Tynwald petition, is the complaints procedures into the health and social care system. We've actually got an agenda with the Minister and one of the petitioners on tomorrow evening at 6:00. But are we content that the new regulations are independent enough and are actually going to deal with the problem, give people confidence?
I don't think they are. And I've got a constituent who might be your guest, I don't know, who has been passed from pillar to post by the health service and by the complaints process for a number of years now, and writes to me on a fairly regular basis, and goes into a great deal of detail about why the system doesn't work at the moment and why the proposals aren't going to work either. So I've got real concerns about whether or not this is independent enough.
Paul?
Well, I'm still getting my head around this. Comes under Manx Care now, right? This is the new umbrella that deals with it. Do they? Excuse me, because I haven't got briefing notes, so I don't know.
Okay.
Is that how it works? I mean, Manx Care, this £3 million thing that is going to try.
So in essence, if you have a complaint against Manx Care, you can deal with your complaint directly with Manx Care. If that doesn't work, you can then go to a committee of ombudsmen. The committee of ombudsmen is appointed independently of the department, but ultimately, you exhaust the whole process. The Ombudsman Committee makes recommendations
to Manx Care.
And Manx Care can choose to accept the recommendation.
You've answered the question then, haven't you?
And then the Department of Health and Social Care can choose to direct Manx Care to follow the recommendation. But ultimately, this may or may not happen. And the Minister, when I pressed him on this point, said, Tynwald can hold the department to account.
And that's the problem with an awful lot of legislation. It's the word may in legislation, isn't it, rather than must. I've got another constituent who has the River Doo running through his land, which floods, and he's now got a big gravel bank in the middle of the river, and he's been onto the DOI and said, listen, under the legislation, it's a flood river and you've got to sort this out. And they've said, no, the legislation says that we may sort it out. And it's ridiculous. So he said, fine, okay, I've got a digger, I'll dig it out and I'll sort it out. No, you can't do that. No, you've got to have our experts come down and tell you what to do and how to do it and when to do it. So, things like that are a complete and utter madness. And I think that all legislation should be rewritten and take the word may out. You've either got to do something or you've not.
Yeah. And we're starting to come towards the end of the programme. We've probably got a minute or two left. Are we all excited by the likely announcement of the Chief Minister on Tuesday, the big announcement in relation to economic strategy? Is this going to be the answer to all our prayers, do we think, or is there still a lot of work to do?
I think we've got to wait for that statement on Tuesday to see what is said. I think it's a massive piece of work that's been undertaken by KPMG. For me personally, as a member of the House of Keys, I'm more interested in how the public react, what they've got to say about this, because it is probably some of the biggest changes we've seen on the island for 40 or 50 years. So it's how the public react. And I think that's the one bit of advice for all elected members, is to make sure that they listen to the views of the constituents and feed that back into the process.
And Stu, for your final comment?
The KPMG report, I don't know how much that has cost, but I think you could probably sum it up in just a couple of words: do better or try harder. I don't expect that there's going to be anything that's much of a revelation in it to us. I think it's going to tell us what we already know, to be honest.
The one thing about Alf Cannon is he has that thing, and I've used it many times. These are not the droids you're looking for. He can look you right in the eyeballs, and he can sell things. He is very good, and he has got that way of trying to get something over the finish line. He says going to consultation, the public consultation, which is here we go again. So that's another few months down the list. There's going to be people saying one thing, other people saying the other thing. Who do you listen to? You've got to go on with this thing. If you believe in it, you've got to push it through and get on with it.
Well, that's all we have time for, sadly, on the programme. I hope you've enjoyed listening to my guests, Rob Callister, MHK, Stu Peters, MHK, and political commentator Paul Moulton. And you can listen again if you wish to the podcast, or contact me, Phil Gorn at manxradio.com, if you have any views of the programme.